content-rich presentation on how to identify and provide meaningful support to children who are considered to be most apt to receive special education services. I would remiss, however, if I didn't take the opportunity to introduce the chairman and CEO of JDTAN, Mr. Leo Gillen, soon to be Dr. Gillen. And so I'm going to call on Dr. Gillen to make his opening remarks, and we're going to proceed from there. Dr. Gillen.
You're okay. You're muted, Leo.
Mute. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I am Leo Gilling. Been the founder and chairman of the Jamaica Diaspora Education Task Force and Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network. Been around for a better part of 10 years. Work very closely with the Ministry of Education, with especially the Jamaica Teachers Association, who's been our partner for the past 10 years. We work very closely with the Union of Jamaica Alumni Association, and several universities across the United States, Broward College, Barry University, Manhattan College, Marymount, Manhattan College, La Sierra University, Loma Linda University. We work with a lot of universities, and they're still coming on board to help us to find ways how to build capacity in Jamaica. And we've been doing this, as I said, for the longest time. We have several projects. This here is what we call a Jaminar, not a name for a webinar or seminar online. And but we have other projects that we run with Loma Linda University, where teachers leave Jamaica and they go to California, and they spend 1 week to develop ways in which they use devices inside classroom. That's been done for the past 10 years. We also have our flagship project that comes up once a year. Coming up this year is going to be our 9th Education Summit, May 28th through June 1. It's a summit and gala that will be held on the campus of University of Miami. And oftentimes you'll see Jaminars like this in education, in health, in agriculture, whichever it is that wherever the need arises. And so we are happy to have you on board, all you teachers. I wish I could know what level you are, whether you are at the primary, infant, or basic, tertiary, or secondary, high school level. If you don't mind, just drop a message on in this Zoom and let me know which school it is that you're tuning in from. I welcome each and every one of you. I thank the presenter, our backline, Antoinette Brown, both doctors, Colin and also Dale. Thank you guys very much for putting on these wonderful workshops. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Leo. I have noticed a very important gentleman. He seems to have disappeared off the screen. He's Dr. Walter G. McCoy. I'd like to acknowledge him and anyone else that may be a special guest to us this afternoon. I welcome you warmly. Dale, would you just like to say a few words before Waukesha kicks off with her presentation?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone, and we certainly are appreciative of the presence of every teacher in the audience. We're always looking for ways in which we can help to improve capacity, in ways in which we can help teachers become more competent at their craft. As a teacher myself, it's always a struggle in terms of how to serve the needs of special needs students, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot of valuable information that can help us, whether your classroom is here in the States or, of course, in Jamaica. So it's a pleasure to be here and to learn and to share with everyone who is here this evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. So, as I said earlier on, I have the distinct honor of knowing our presenter for a very long time. I know her from she was an infant, and I have done a presentation with her before on an international scale, and I was very impressed with her presentation then, and I'm quite certain that I'm going to be impressed, and so will you, with her vast knowledge around pedagogy and around the theories of education. So it is my distinct honor and great privilege to introduce to you the daughter of one of my good friends, Miss Waukesha McCoy. Take it on now, Waukesha.
Thank you. And I count it a blessing to be a part of this platform as well. So I'm just going to get right into my presentation that I have. Just let me share my screen, and then we'll jump right into this. Okay. Is everybody able to see my screen? Yeah, okay. All right. So again, this presentation is on identifying and supporting students in need of special education services. Just quickly, I'm going to give a background information about myself. So I'm from Paterson, New Jersey. I've been here my entire life. I went to William Patterson University of New Jersey and received my bachelor's degree in psychology and education, along with my certification to teach students with disabilities. I've been a teacher for over 10 years. I'm approaching my 12th year of teaching, and I've worked through various grade levels in different areas of special education. In 2020, January 2020, I graduated from Seton Hall University in New Jersey with a master's degree in educational leadership, management, and policy. And then in 2022, I went back to school at Montclair State University in New Jersey to receive my certification to teach students who are gifted and talented. And I'm also currently this school year, this semester back for another master's degree in special education, focusing on being a learning disability teacher consultant. So that's just a little bit about my background, and we're just gonna jump into this presentation. So the objectives and goals are to define and explore special education. I'm gonna give you the overall scope of special education. It's a lot of ins and outs of it and a lot of complexities towards it. Identifying laws that's pertaining to SPED. And when you see SPED, of course, I'm talking about special education, exploring learning styles and cognitive development, identifying students with potential needs, understanding INRS process, analyzing the IEP process. We may touch on 504 plans and understand the speech and language process as well, along with modifications and accommodations and parental rights, and discipline for special education students. Okay, so I know we can't unmute ourselves, but you can type in the chat. I wanted this to be engaging, so if you want to type in the chat, you can. I just want you to think of what are some words, stereotypes, or thoughts, good or bad, that come to mind when you hear special education. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to show a quick video about well, we can go into some myths, and then I'll show a video about what special education is. So some myths and misconceptions about special education. Special education students are only taught in a self-contained classroom. You can determine a person is or has a special needs by looking at them. Only students who struggle with academics are considered for special education. Only special education teachers teach students who have special needs. All students who receive special education services will be labeled forever. Special education services are expensive, so other kids will lose out on activities. Special education is an easy fix or considered the end-all be-all. Childhood disability is easily diagnosed. Special needs students will never be successful, and parents must agree with the placement and services of these special needs students. So these are a lot of what society believes that happens when a student or individual receives special needs services. And these are a lot of myths and misconceptions, and we'll get into the reality of what special education really is. Okay, I'm gonna share this video with you all. Just give me a second. Okay.
My son Max has lots of energy and no interest in reading. At school, it was becoming a problem. But my sister's a teacher, and she wondered if Max might need some form of special education. And I said, no way! He's perfect! But she said he can be perfect and still have special needs. She said special education is an umbrella term for all sorts of challenges. Some issues are obvious, but some are harder to identify. I ignored her, but over time, my bright boy seemed to lose his bounce. He stopped wanting to go to school. He said he was stupid. It broke my heart. Turns out, we're not alone. Many kids have learning challenges, and there's a law called IDEA, which guarantees every child with a disability a free and appropriate public education. In fact, if a learning problem is suspected, public schools are legally required to have the child evaluated, but families may have to request it. If the child's eligible, teachers, specialists, and parents make an individualized education program, that's IEP in EduSpeak, or a 504 plan, legal documents which set forth what the school will do for the child. Sounds simple, right? Well, it rarely is. In Max's case, his first plan didn't have what he needed. Thanks to my sister, I learned that in order to get Max the right support, I might have to be, well, persistent. She helped me research Max's options. Most students getting special services stay in their ordinary classrooms, but get extra support like tutoring or extra time on tests. Some students end up in separate classrooms with specialized teachers, but spend part of the day with non-disabled peers. Finally, a few schools, most of them private, only serve students with specific needs like autism or dyslexia. I found the best path for my child, and you can too. Worried your child might need something special?
Okay, so that is just a quick background of what special education is, and we're going to go further into detail. Okay, so special education defined, it is a branch of specialized education. It is mandated and offered to individual children, not all students, but individual children. Special education, according to what we have here in the United States, is called is defined by the IDEA as instructions that is designed specifically to respond to the learning needs of an individual with disability, regardless of the environment, whether in a classroom, home, or hospital. Special education is composed of a range of teaching practices specifically designed for the needs of individuals with disabilities who have special learning needs that are implemented by well-trained special education teachers. So, in layman terms as well, it is a legal, in the United States, it is a legal mandate that all districts must provide or service students with special needs. There's no getting around that. They are legally mandated. And educators who implement instructions to students with disabilities must be certified. A general education teacher cannot or should not, for the most part, teach students who may need to be pulled out or placed in a different LRE, which we are going to learn about as well. My personal thoughts in regards to special education is that with the paradigm shift happening in special education, I personally believe that all educators should receive some type of background knowledge or course regarding special education due to a lot of our students becoming mainstream in recent years. So this is an example of a mission statement and the vision of the state of New Jersey, which you can also implement if your area where you are from may not have a mission or vision statement. So according to the state of New Jersey, the mission is providing educators and families, along with other stakeholders, with technical assistance, professional learning, and evidence-based practices and access to instructional materials, resources necessary for students with IEPs to achieve the goals established for all New Jersey students. And the vision is to empower all educators, families, and other stakeholders with the knowledge, skills, and resources necessary to ensure that individuals with IEPs graduate into competitive, integrated employment, post-secondary education, and active community involvement. And Dr. Wolf, you could stop me at any point if you need to interject. Okay, what is special education law? So throughout history, there have been many disadvantages from, as you know, from slavery to the women's suffrage movement to civil rights. And it is the same thing with education as a whole, and in particular, special education. And if we look back, I'll show some of the laws that are in place while I speak. As we look back, there was a time when special education was underrepresented and also overlooked as a whole. And there was some negative stigmas placed along with special education. And also sometimes special education was overpopulated and racially motivated, especially when it comes to Black boys throughout history. And we are still seeing some of those today. So again, here are some laws that are placed within the state of New Jersey. I'll just read one of them. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. And I will again get into that. And according to the federal and New Jersey state laws, schools must provide what is known as a free appropriate public education, which we call FAPE, in the least restrictive environment to all children with disabilities from ages 3 through age 21 or until high school graduation, whichever one comes first. So IDEA and FAPE, there is what we call no exceptions. There is a zero reject. So zero reject is a basic principle of the IDEA, specifying that no student with a disability, no matter what kind or how severe, they can be denied to a free, appropriate public education. So they must receive, again, some type of services. And here are just some continuations of the law with the government and the United States that occurred over time. We have the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, which addresses the protection for students with disabilities. Section 504 is a federal law designed to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities and programs, activities that receive federal financial assistance from the department. And you will hear, again, more about these terms later on. IDEA is an important act that was placed throughout history when it comes to dealing with the education system, and it's constantly amended throughout recent history as well. And the purpose of IDEA is to ensure the rights of children with disabilities and parents of children are protected. It assists states, localities, educational services and agencies, and federal agencies to provide for the education of all students with disabilities. It ensures that educators and parents have the necessary tools to improve educational results for children with disabilities. And it assesses and ensures the effectiveness of efforts to educate children with disabilities. So now we're going to, before we can get into what special education is, we have to go through the process leading up to special education. So we're gonna just look back at the different multiple intelligences. And if you're an educator in this group, then I'm sure that you've heard of different learning styles and multiple intelligences, which goes back to a psychologist named Howard Gardner, who was a developmental psychologist. And we are not limited to just these 8 intelligences, but there's room for more. So as you can tell, there are different learning styles. Learning styles is the way that a person approaches learning and studying. And then there's also the term called learning preferences, where it's a preferred way of studying and learning. So an example of learning preference can be choosing to study with pictures versus studying with text, or like choosing to study with music or silence. So each person has their own learning preference, and people also have their own learning styles as well. So here we have verbal, which is words are your strong point. You prefer to use words in both speech and writing. Visual, you prefer to use pictures, diagrams, images, and for understanding to help learn. Some students may be musical or auditory, where you prefer using sounds or music or even rhythms to help you learn. So sometimes you may hear like a student create a rap or sing a song about a specific topic, and that's the way that they process the information being taught to them. Physical and kinesthetic, I'm more so this type of learner as well, where you use your hand and body and sense of touch to help you learn. So it's more of a hands-on experience for you to grasp the content that's being taught. Logical and mathematical, learning is easier for you to use logic, reasoning systems, and sequences. And then there's the social aspect as well, where you like to learn new things as a part of a group. Explaining your understanding to a group helps you learn. So this is where we have discussions and things of that nature. And also there's a combination where you can combine different types of learning styles. All right, so this information is important because of cognitive development and how it relates to the special education. So Piaget's theory focus, he's another psychologist as well, focused on cognitive development. Children go through stages of intellectual growth marked by different ways of thinking. So I can't get too deep into it, but so there are 4 different stages, according to Piaget, who's a cognitive psychologist, as to where children and how children think. Active exploration and interaction with the environment and shaping cognitive development plays a major role. And children construct their understanding of the world through assimilation and accommodation. And assimilation is basically fitting new information into what we already know. And accommodation is changing what we know to respond to a new situation. So if we look here, most people normally fall into what we may call average performers. And if you look at this part where it says poor performers, this is usually where we find, unfortunately, students who may be struggling academically and in other areas or may need some type of assistance. And if we look at our high performers, this is where we have a population that also tends to be overlooked as well, called the gifted and talented population. So we'll touch more about that in the future as well. So these are some things to look out for prior to a student being, classified, or things you should take notice of if you have a sense that there may be an area where a child may be struggling. So take note or make observations of the following. Academics is number one: reading, math, writing, etc. So in reading, you may see a student who has anxiety around reading. They may become reluctant or tense. They may have difficulty recognizing words or letters. They also may have poor vocabulary skills. Their comprehension skills may be in an area where they may struggle. And math, it can be something simple as counting and putting them in order and in the correct number. And for writing, if their handwriting is unreadable and if their spoken language is difficult or staggered. When it comes to behavior and emotion, examples are anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, ADD, ADHD. And with behavioral disorders, behaviors are unusual, and it usually interferes with the students' growth and development and or the lives of others. So, and this also occurs over a long period of time, which affects their educational performance. And when we hear of ADHD, I know that's a big thing now, where we see that the population has increased over time. But students with ADHD, they deal with inattention, where they may not pay close attention and are easily distracted. And that's also where the hyperactivity and impulsiveness comes into play, where they may fidget a lot or can't keep still, and you know that they're motivated to go fast. There is no slow with them, and things of that nature. For communication, speech and language, speech can be any type of speech disorder when it comes to fluency disorders or articulation, voicing problems like their pitch, loudness. And a language disorder is about the lack of ability to understand what a person may be saying or also express. So there's a receptive expression and expressive reception, where students may have issues with that as well. Intellectual and development, delay in cognitive, social, and emotional skills. So they can, intellectual and developmental affect their cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. So examples of this can be autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and things of that nature. And then there's also other health impaired, where this can include students who may be deaf or hard of hearing, vision impairments, they may have seizure disorders, and things of that nature. So these are some things that you can look out for students when you sense that there is something possibly off. And also keep in mind that some students may take time to see and observe. So therefore, again, like I said, a disability, you may not just see it on a person. It again takes time to become aware of a potential need for a student. Okay, so in the state of New Jersey, we have a process called INRS, which is Intervention and Referral Services. In America, all students whose teachers see a student struggling must go through what we call RTI, which is a response to intervention. And INRS for the state of New Jersey is our response to intervention. And the goal is for students to get research-based instruction and support as the teacher documents interventions that have been tried before a referral for evaluation. So again, in New Jersey, we use INRS. And INRS is used to assist students who are experiencing learning, behavior, health, or social emotional difficulties, and to assist the staff who have difficulties in addressing the students' needs. The focus is on a specific problem. So teachers have to identify, we can't just say this kid needs help. Needs help on what? Or where is the issue that you see currently? So focus on a specific problem using available resources in the general education setting. So at this point, the child is not receiving special education services. INRS is done in a general education classroom setting. INRS does not mean special education services or that a student will be classified. Again, this is the first step. It is the intervention process and the response to intervention before going down the route of special education. So this is the steps that we follow in my district. Teachers, so initially teachers make requests for assistance. They identify a problem. They usually see the guidance counselor or the INRS coordinator. Then the INRS coordinator meets with the INRS team, which consists of the INRS coordinator, the SPED chair, which I am also a special education chair as well, the basic skills instructor, and a general education teacher, just to see what the issues are and to discuss possible interventions before meeting with parents. And then this is the initial INRS meeting is where we incorporate the parent and we state the different issues that the teachers may see within the general education, and parents can voice their concerns as well if they are in agreement to services or not. So that's the first round. And then we're followed up with an intervention follow-up meeting. This usually occurs within 6 to 8 weeks after the first round, where we implement different interventions and we see and analyze if the interventions are working or if we need to come up with more interventions. Then another meeting again is held, and then if we continue to see the problem, then that's when the INRS coordinator and the SPED chair will send a referral to CST, which is the child study team. So these are just members of the child study team listed. There's a case manager, a social worker, school psychologist, guidance counselor, a behaviorist, special education chair or teacher, the building principal, a LDTC, the parent and guardian, a translator if needed, speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, and also if parents want to bring in an advocate on their behalf, or if they have any other, for example, if they want to bring their relatives with them, they can join the meeting as well, as long as there's parental consent. Once this is done, the guidance counselor submits the referral to CST. Identification meeting with CST is held with the parents. And then assessments will be conducted by CST if the child study team deems it that the interventions have not been working, and that students will eventually become evaluated. And then also parents must give consent to a written consent to the child study team to conduct these assessments and evaluations. Once these assessments and evaluations are completed, they must give parents the results prior to the meeting that they will have with the child study team after the assessments have been done. And that's where we have the evaluation and eligibility. Okay, eligibility for special education. Parents are sent the final results of evaluation before eligibility meeting. At this meeting, the child study team will explain if the child is eligible or not eligible for special education. If students are eligible for special education services, then this now is where an IEP will be created, and parents again must give written consent for the classification to proceed with the IEP. Parents do have a right to oppose and also to ask to do an evaluation on their own, as long as it's done by the proper evaluators if they want to go to an outside agency. However, it's not as simple as one may think. Okay, now when we're heading into the IEP process, the child study team is going to need information from the teacher to help create a plaque where we identify the student's strengths, their weaknesses, their personal interests. We identify the area of concern, areas of growth, and interventions that are going to be in place. Okay, I know you've heard me use the term IEP, so we're going to explain what an IEP is. IEP is an individualized education plan. IEPs are a legally binding contract agreement between the school district and the parents or guardian. So anything that goes in the IEP, parents and teachers, parents, you have again, it is legally binding. You have a right to contact, or because you're a part of the IEP team as well, you have a right to call for a meeting regarding your child and things of that nature at any point in time. It identifies all the programs and services that school districts will provide to the student. It can be modified or changed at any time, and other related services in order for the student to learn are described in detail. Other services and supported services must be described as well. IEP is also renewed annually, so each year you will have a meeting with the teachers, the child study team, and the parents to go over the IEP that's been implemented and to see if students have reached their goals and areas that we want to either create new goals for the student or increase different services or remove different services as well. Again, it must state the academic goals, progression towards the goals. It must be specific related services, justification for the placement of where we're going to place the student. Participation in district and statewide assessments is also made known here within the IEP if necessary. I know in the state of New Jersey, our state testing begins in 3rd grade. So if you have children who have an IEP from 2nd grade on down, they most likely will not have a plan in place for statewide testing because that begins at 3rd grade. And also a behavior plan, if necessary, is also implemented here. And beginning at age 14 in the IEP, what's implemented is what we call transitional services. And by age 16, a statement needs to be made as to how the child will further their education or enter the workforce. So it's also preparing children for after high school. It is a live document. And again, like I said, parents can request meetings at any time. All teachers must read the IEP for students with special needs, including specials teachers, which are art, music, physical education, things of that nature. Sometimes teachers in these areas do not read the IEP, which is not okay, because some of our students need different type of assistance, whether it be the use of a special type of scissor to cut things in art or music. They may need special headphones if they have problems with hearing, or in physical education if they have some type of physicality issue that they may need an adjustment and implements in physical education. So it's important that everyone who interacts with students with the special needs or who gives instruction must read the IEP. Roles of the educator. The general education teacher, they are the content expert, implements curriculum to the class-wide activities, thinks of supplemental activities to support mastery of the curriculum and close the achievement gap, and they also monitor the students' progress. The special education teacher is the strategies expert, so they basically know the different modifications and accommodations that could be implemented. They know different ways to implement the curriculum, the delivery of the curriculum when teaching or interacting with students with special needs. They analyze how the disability impacts learning behavior and etc. Actively implement the IEP services that students are to receive in order to make their goals, and implement the modifications and accommodations. Paraprofessionals or aides, I'm not sure what you call them, wherever you may be from, but they work under the supervision of the certified staff, which is the teachers, behaviorists, OT, and different types of people involved who are certified. They support learning and positive behavior for students. They also help keep data if need be, and they reinforce and implement strategies. They're there to assist the student. Confidentiality must be maintained, and they also should read the IEP. And I want to say confidentiality across the board is necessary when it comes to interacting with students with special needs. The LRE, or the least restrictive environment, is where students will be placed. So students, before we get into that, students are to be educated in the general education classroom to the fullest extent. So now, as opposed to years ago or decades ago, now we're seeing more of the mainstream of students, where they're being incorporated more into the general education population of students, and they're receiving services in there. If students need more assistance, then they will be placed in the different types of special education settings. For example, a resource room, a self-contained LLD, a MD, which is multiple disabled, and etc. This is done only when supports and services are not enough to help students learn in the general education classroom. So there are different types of LREs. The general education classroom, which is mainstream or inclusion, where again, we're seeing a lot of our school districts across the board trying to move students towards mainstreaming and becoming a part of the general education classroom, and not, I don't want to use the word separate, but we're trying to incorporate them more into a quote unquote regular setting. Resource room is where students may be pulled out for specific subjects like language arts and math, and they will work in a small group setting with a teacher who is a special education teacher who is certified, where they, again, will work in a small group setting. The modifications and accommodations will be implemented. Gifted and talented programs for students who are considered students with special needs. We call this twice exceptional students because they have special education needs and they're also gifted. And in some areas, believe it or not, aside from twice exceptional children, gifted and talented programs can also fall under the umbrella of special education. Why? Because there's alteration done to the curriculum or the delivery of instruction.
Ms. McCoy,
Yes.
could I just intercept there, because I'd like the audience in Jamaica to know that there are some very smart children in certain schools in Jamaica that are considered to be high performance school. Those are the children that we're referring to as an example as gifted and talented. They may be exceptionally bright in literature, in math, in chemistry, in physics. And what Ms. McCoy is saying, that these children are also special education children. So there's a continuum of a placement or classification from children who are experiencing difficulty with learning and cognition to the extreme end, opposite end, where children are exceptionally bright. And that in Jamaica, we are getting people to understand that the exceptionally bright children are also special education children, and there ought to be special attention given to those kids to accelerate their learning as well. Back to you, Ms. McCoy.
Thank you, Dr. Wolf. Exactly what he's saying. And also they do have a special curriculum, because oftentimes we try, unfortunately, gifted and talented students are somewhat stagnant and overlooked because they already know the content, and we don't give them areas to quest and explore the content, or even enhance or go forward with the content being taught. Self-contained is another type of LRE. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm not able to get into that. ABA, life skills, a behavioral program, a multiple disabled program, a language learning disability, specialized school, homebound, and hospital and residential facilities for those who are physically or may have a health disability where they are not able to go into a physical school. Just to touch on speech and language services. So a referral is speech and language. A referral is usually submitted to the speech therapist and or the child study team. The speech therapist conducts an evaluation once given parental consent, and a meeting with the parent or guardian is held over the evaluations and the eligibility. And again, as I stated before, speech and language is kind of not difficult, but kind of complex because they are two different things. This is something that I am actually learning more about as well, where we're learning about if student has struggles with receptive or expressive language, articulation, and things of that nature, which I mentioned previously. So next, and those were just some of the placements and things of that nature. Modifications and accommodations are also implemented and placed in the IEP as well. So modifications are changes being implemented to the curriculum and what students are to learn. These modifications help students participate effectively and meaningfully in the classroom. So examples can be instructional level or curriculum at a lower reading level for assignments. So for example, if a child is in 5th grade and whereas a general education student may be given a material like a reading passage or something of that nature at a 5th grade level, focusing on character analysis, for example. What you can do for the child who is in need of special needs services, they can get a simpler text for them to grasp and understand, but relating to the topic at hand, which is character analysis. That way they're understanding what character analysis is, but in different levels, if you understand what I'm saying. Complete different assignments than others, grading different than other students as well, reducing or omitting certain questions or assignments and using pictures as support. These are just some examples. There are a plethora more of examples as well. Accommodations are used for the student to gain the most from the instruction. The accommodations do not change the current grade level of instruction and content, and accommodations provide equal opportunity to show what the students know. So examples, some students may need extra time to complete an assignment, the environment, they may need an outline of the lesson. Flexible students, they may not be able to sit in a regular chair. They probably may need a bouncy ball or like a stool to stand up and do their work or X, Y, and Z. Testing in a quiet room, and extended time on projects, and highlighting text. So discipline for special education students is quite different from disciplining, and this is more for the administrative side, is different from disciplining a student who is of the general education population. So, and these are just some laws and codes that are in place. So when disciplining, especially if educators have to, send a child into in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, when it comes to special ed education, they must consider the implementation of instruction that needs to be provided to these students, no matter where they are. So, for example, one, all children, including children with disability, deserve a safe, well-disciplined school and orderly learning environments. Teachers and student administrators should have tools they need to assist them in preventing misconduct and discipline problems, and to assess or address these problems if they arise. This is where also the behaviorists may come into play to implement a functional behavior plan, things of that nature. And there must be a balanced approach to the issue of discipline of children with disabilities that reflects the need for orderly and safe schools and the need to protect the right of children with disability to a free and appropriate education. And appropriate developed IEP with well-developed behavior intervention strategies to decrease school discipline problems. So again, this is where you would talk more to the school behaviorists. Again, just winding down, parents do have rights and can challenge the service of special needs students. So parents, you do have a voice if you do not agree with what the child study team has in place. You do not have to sign it. We can't force you to do anything. So, but if there are services that you would like for your child to have, that can be discussed and possibly implemented as long as there's a justification behind it as well. So, and also, I'm not sure what other states, but in the state of New Jersey, we do and are mandated to give you a parental rights booklet. We're dealing with students with special education at the time where we were discussing the IEP. So it is important that if your state or wherever you go gives you a parental rights pamphlet or booklet, that you read through it, because there are plenty of rights that parents do have to help better the needs of their child. And my closing remark, basically, I'm just an advocate for special needs students as a whole. Oftentimes, we focus on the equality of education versus the equity, hence the picture. Some students may need more help than others. So we want to focus more on equitable education instead of equal education. No matter where a student comes from, no matter their race or gender or disability or no disability, students across the board deserve an equitable education. And if there's any questions, here is where I can accept them. I hope I stayed under time.
Yes, you did, and I thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask Antoinette to see whether there's any question in the chat that we can field. But before we do that, while Antoinette gathers those questions, I'd like to recognize two of my colleagues from JDTAN in the audience, Dr. Wright and Dr. Frey. They're health professionals. And indeed, the more we as educators look at certain cognitive or social dysfunctions among students, which can lead to a special education classification, is the more we're seeing, and I'm sure Ms. McCoy will agree with me on this, that there's a direct correlation between health services and special education services as well. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. So when it comes to health services, that's kind of also where a 504 plan would take place. I actually have a little bit of information about a 504. Just give me 1 second.
And while, okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry.
Press
So
on.
504 plans. 504 is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and ensures that students with medical or other disabilities have equal access to an education, and qualified students will receive accommodations and modifications as well, and placement if placement is needed. Usually from my interaction, students who have 504 plans usually get a recommendation from different doctors, whether if it's for ADHD. It doesn't mean that just because your child or a student may have ADHD that they're going to be label or classify under special education. They can get a 504 plan because it's not necessarily interceding on their academics, because they may possibly be taking medication and things of that nature. I know, like, if for students who may have like diseases like sickle cell and things like that, there are times when they may be out for an extended period of time of school. So 504 plans help accommodate those students as well. It provides accommodations for the child and does not require specialized instruction. So this 504 plan is implemented within the general education population, and it does not have to be renewed every year. And it aims to provide a child with special needs to free and appropriate education, and protects them from discrimination from their disability. And then there's a process for that as well. Usually a written letter is done from the parent and given to, and the doctors as well, given to the guidance counselor. And then a meeting is scheduled with the parent and guidance counselor as well, and the nurse if need be, if it's a medical reason, to discuss the different implementations and the concerns that may need to be addressed. Things also like asthma and things like that can possibly, if it's severe, can possibly also need a 504, or different physical ailments, like if students may have problems with their legs, with walking properly, like they may need certain accommodations, such as using the elevator instead of walking long periods of time. So things like that. And then a 504 plan is then created and implemented. So that's just touching a little bit about what a 504 plan is.
Thank you, Ms. McCoy. Thank you for sharing your vast knowledge of special education with us this evening. For those in our audience that are residing in Jamaica and who are educators in the Jamaican school system, I am aware that some of the references that we're sharing with you this evening might not be immediately applicable to your context and to your experiences, but we wanted you to have a more global perspective of how special education programs operate in the wider world. One of the reasons, for example, we have chosen to do this presentation today is that we did a questionnaire among many of our teachers in Jamaica, and they have indicated to us that the improper behavior of students at all grade levels, from infant school all the way up to tertiary institution as well, but we're going to stop at high school for the purpose of this conversation this evening, that teachers are noticing in Jamaica and in other parts of the world an increasing trend of recalcitrant behavior among children. They're becoming more disruptive during the lessons. They're becoming much more defiant to sometimes to teachers and certainly to their classmates. One of the things that I think we're going to have to talk about, Ms. McCall, we're going to have to invite you back, and perhaps we can have Dr. Wright or Dr. Freer or someone from their office do a combined presentation with the medical piece and the educational piece. Because in places like Jamaica, speaking from firsthand knowledge, we don't want to ignore the significance of the sociology of the community and how certain sociological beliefs and practices can affect children's behavior, which can also lead to an improper referral. And I wanted to also mention that here in the United States, and I'm sure it's going to be mushrooming soon in Jamaica, because many of the school systems are adopting what goes on in the United States. Parents will have to be, and teachers have to be very careful in advising, and the operative word is advising parents about the referral process. So if you suspect that a student or a child might need special education services, here in the United States, you can go to a private provider, such as a clinic. Right. Now, I have not done any independent research on this. Neither have I seen any empirical research that has been done on this, but it has come to my attention in my experience as an educator that some of these places wrongly diagnose your children when you go to them for referral, or perhaps it's not only a wrongly diagnosis, or they deliberately improperly diagnose your children so that those children can become clients of theirs. So you have to be very careful where you take your child to have them evaluated. You have to be very careful that if you go to certain doctors and other places that are not the schoolhouse, that they don't unnecessarily put your child on medication. I have seen throughout the history of my career where parents have taken their children to private institutions, certain doctors that are unfortunately behaving in an unscrupulous manner, medical doctors that is, and they have given those children heavy medication, which was not needed in the first place. And those children come to school looking like zombies. They're spaced out, and we're looking now at the trajectory of that kind of child who is on medication from an early age, and it is now being discovered that a lot of those kids become dependent on narcotics once they have left school, and they become heavy drug users. Now, if it was going to stop there, it's bad, but maybe it's still within the realm of what is controllable. But we're also finding that a lot of those children who were referred in the 1980s and 90s to special education programs where they were dependent on heavy medication, not only did they become heavily involved in the illicit use of drugs, but many of them have ended up being incarcerated, especially Black boys. So some friends and I are looking at the referral rates among Black boys, because there is a tendency for some teachers in some school settings, not only in Jamaica, but here in the United States and in Great Britain, I know, and Canada, to refer boys to special education. In fact, there are several empirical studies that have been done which promulgate the idea that more Black boys in many municipalities, in many school systems, are being referred to special education among rather than Black girls. So we've got to be very careful of that, teachers, that you consider all the options before you make a recommendations for referral. Would you agree with me, Ms. McCoy?
Yes, and I am not one that's opposed to medication. However, I do believe that there should be multiple interventions in place before heading down the medical route of medication. And if your student or students are being medicated, it is imperative and critical to know the different side effects, which you can also speak to whomever your school nurse may be, and also get notes from the doctor as well, so that teachers and other administrators can have a close eye on those students, because in the long term, there have been cases where the side effects of medication can either lead to depression, even suicidal thoughts. Students may be extremely tired. It can lead to a plethora of different things. So it is important to keep a close observation on those students, and just be aware, and gain as much knowledge as possible. Again, I'm not opposed to medication. The school system cannot force a parent to let their child take Medicaid. That is completely against the rule. The doctors can suggest it, but again, it's ultimately up to the parent.
And thank you for saying that. I want us to touch on, well, in another 5 minutes. Antoinette, is there any question in the chat that we can respond to?
Yes, we do have 2 questions actually from the YouTube group. So the first question is from Fiona Reynolds, states, do you think it's best for special needs children to be in mainstream schooling?
Good question.
It depends. Again, special education is based off of the individual. So I can't speak on it on a broad perspective. It goes back to the individual student. Do I believe that students, I do agree that most students are going towards mainstream, which is the inclusion classroom model, because they're able to adapt and maneuver within the classroom and understand the content with the different modifications and accommodations. So I am here for mainstreaming students, personally speaking. However, it is focused more on the individual. Everything in special education, just because a label, quote unquote, does not define the student, and the resources presented based off the label, we can't just say it applies to every student. It is specifically designed for that individual. I can't say that, for example, we just talked about medicine. Oh, the student has ADHD. Let's give that kid medicine. No, no, no. Some students may need that, but some students may need something as simple as a fidget in their hand to stimulate them while also completing their work. Or some students may need a different approach, like flexible seating or standing up to do their work. They're able to do it in a classroom setting, but it depends on the individual child.
So what we're saying then is that the range of tolerable stimulation is a determining factor. To the person who posed the question, I totally agree and endorse what Ms. McCoy said. I would only augment that briefly by saying that some children who are diagnosed to be eligible for special education services don't function well in a regular classroom at all because they're overstimulated.
Right.
Some of that stimulation could be social stimulation. Some of it could be lighting. Some of it could be the furnishing of the room. Some of that could relate to the color of the wall, the paint on the wall. There is a myriad of factors that can either in a combined way or individually overstimulate a child that makes the child incongruent, the needs incongruent to a regular classroom. So what they have done in the United States, and I'm sure they will be doing that shortly in Jamaica if it's not been done yet, is that Ms. McCoy referred to a CTT classroom. And another word for that is an inclusion classroom, where you have the special education student or students in a limited number. I think it's only 20%, if I'm not mistaken, of the regular classroom can be comprised of special education children with IEP.
The high school level is 40, Dr. Wolf.
Huh?
It's a 60-40 division at the high school.
It's a 60-40, so have them increase. Thanks, Dr. Britton. And what happens is that the regular education teacher will be primarily responsible for the regular education children, whereas the special education teacher who is also assigned to that room. So you have two teachers in that room, a regular education teacher who is teaching the 60% that are not deemed to need any special education services, and you have a special education teacher who is assigned to teach those that are eligible for special education services. Usually there's also a para in that room. So there are contingencies that can be put in place to keep a child with special education needs in a mainstream educational setting. But it is all determined by the child's IEP. The term IEP means Individual Education Plan. And earlier on, Ms. McCoy quite eloquently talked about that. She mentioned that every year, the school-based support team, the psychologist, the social worker, the guidance counselor, a representative from the regular faculty meet with the child and do an evaluation on the child's IEP. Do we need to change it? Do we need to increase the frequency by which they're pulled out of the room, et cetera, et cetera? And there's also a triennial that is done every 3 years, at which time, by the way, if a child no longer needs special
Right.
education services, the child will then be dismissed, for want of a better. There's another term, Waukesha, that they use. Remind me what it is, or Dale. I can't recall it now, but you're exempt from special education in that triennial service. So it's not a life sentence, so to speak.
No, it's not.
So, Doctor, sorry, Ms. McCoy, but just a follow up to that question. The person that did ask the question, Fiona Reynolds, did follow up and said that we're getting there. We are required to start IOPs for our classes.
Brilliant.
So it's coming down the pipeline.
Nice. Thank you, Antoinette. There was another question.
And sorry, just to add on about the mainstream classroom, when there is whole group instruction going on in the classroom, the general education teacher and the special education teacher can also collaborate together to disperse the information or the content that's being presented. And then you can also have small groups at which you can do your differentiated instruction. And that is where the special education teacher can also work with those students in a smaller group, while the general education teacher can also work with the different students in the general education population at differentiated levels. So differentiation is across the board necessary for regular general education populations and within the special education realm as well.
So we're going to, let me just, wonderful thoughts, Ms. McCoy. You're right on the penny with that. And one of the things that Dr. Britton and I are going to try to do is to have a conversation similar to this, where we're going to look at, Ms. McCoy made reference to the multiple intelligences theory. We're not going to get into that today, but there is a professor at Harvard University who came up with the idea that, which challenges the original understanding that we have of intelligence. And I'm going to explain why I'm saying this in a minute. Originally, we see intelligence on a continuum starting, let's say, from 0 to 10 by way of reference. So the child who has very little intelligence, which in the old days they usually call as a buffoon, can't read, can't do anything at all, doesn't have the ability to do that, is considered not to be intelligent. And somebody who is like Einstein is considered to be very intelligent. Now, Howard Gardner, I think his name is, he challenged that view, and he's saying, no, every individual has multiple intelligences. And he identified 7 intelligences: logical, mathematical, spatial, linguistic, and we're not going to get into all of them now. And even there's an 8th one now, emotional intelligence. So when, especially those of my friends that are in the classroom, whether in Jamaica or here, be very careful that if you notice that a child's behavior in your class is not conforming to the norms of the other children, don't rush to say that that child needs special education. Ms. McCoy talked about kinesthetic learners. Some children cannot sit in their seat for 6 hours and 20 minutes for the school day and learn. They have to get up, they have to walk around the classroom. Some of them have to tap their pencils on the table and that sort of thing. That could be a child whose behavior is being governed by the dominant intelligence that is within that child. And they call that a savant. Okay, so in another conversation, we're going to be looking at the multiple intelligences theory, along with the learning style theory, and the correlation of those 2 theories with the special education research that Ms. McCoy so ably shared with us. And by the way, she only shared the tip of the iceberg there's much more that she would have been able to get into if she had time. One more question before we depart.
Yeah, so we have one more question within the YouTube comment. Says, this is from Jennifer Lang. Good evening. Will it be okay for children which is in need of special education to remain in the regular school environment for all time until they leave the school?
So again, getting special education services is a journey. I tell parents that and teachers that all of the time. It is not just because, and you see, this is when I'm talking about something that you can see and tell that something is wrong. There are still steps that you have to go through. And it can take up to a year sometimes, because sometimes it's not an academic thing. It can be a neurological issue. And getting appointments with the doctors can be, I know here in New Jersey, sometimes it's 3-6 months before you can get an appointment. And unfortunately, the child has to stay in the general education setting. And we can give them as much interventions as possible. But when it comes to altering the curriculum and doing things of that nature, we're not allowed to do that until we have a diagnosis of and an IEP in place. So it unfortunately is a difficult place to be in. I've been there before, but like I said, there are different steps that we have to take, or to surpass some of those steps. I know within the state of New Jersey, if a parent writes directly to to the school or the guidance counselor stating that they would like to have a IEP initial meeting, then within 14 days, they must adhere to that. Now, if it's a teacher recommendation, the teacher has to go through the process of response to intervention and go through those different cycles and rounds of that, and then be referred to CST, which can take a long period of time. So
not a quick fix, you're saying then?
It's not.
It's
a journey. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can take up to a year and a half. And that is one of the downsides of getting help for students with special needs is this journey. We know that something is wrong. And that's another reason why I do believe, and I mentioned previously, that even people who are in college now studying to become an educator, that I do believe that they should have some type of course or courses in dealing with students who may potentially have a special need, because you do see them quite often. And also for students, like I said, who do have a classification, a lot of students are becoming mainstream now where they're being included, so they will have some type of interaction with them.
And while you're saying that, and I'm going to ask Dr. Britton to wind up for us and offer any comments that is on his mind. He's a little quiet today, and that's his temperament. He's a very engaged friend and colleague anyway. But while the school waits for an official evaluation, please speak to your principal, speak to your vice principal, speak to your department chair, whomever it is that has authority in that school, and ask for informal services to be rendered to the child. If there's a guidance counselor around, the guidance counselor can pull that child, or the child guidance counselor can come in the room, sit next to the child while the lesson is going on, and provide some informal support. If you have a social worker in the school, that person can also be deployed by the principal to render informal services to the child that is, obviously in need of additional services. The psychologist within the school can be of help as well. So I concur with what Ms. McCoy said, that it is a long, arduous process, But while that process is being effectuated, there can be some, quote, home remedies that the school can apply that can alleviate some of the problems that the child is facing. But by the way, when Ms. McCoy was speaking, the thought that came to my mind too is something about an autistic child. We didn't even get into that this evening. We're going to have a follow-up roundtable conversation, and we can bring that piece in there as well, because autism is one of the more recently explosive concerns that teachers all over the world are experiencing. And there's a lot more referrals taking place with children who are autistic than children who are otherwise classified for special education services. All right. Antoinette, any other pressing question?
No, there are no additional questions at this time.
Okay.
Let's leave it up for Dr. Dale, who's up next.
Dr. Dale, take it over now.
Oh yeah, just to add to what has been said about mainstreaming versus not mainstreaming, I think one of the reasons why the school systems try to mainstream is to prevent the development of stigma around special education students, because historically, special education students have been stigmatized as stupid and dumb and all that sort of stuff. I remember working in a high school where there was a room, a self-contained room, and that's where all day students who are entitled to special education services are kept in that room, either because they're seen as disruptive or because with the best of intentions, someone decided that let's take these group of kids and use certain strategies with them that would be more effective than in a mainstreaming situation. And that room became stigmatized. The majority of the school population did not want to be seen entering or leaving that room because they felt that it would label them as dumb, as stupid, as retarded, whatever the words that they were using. So I think the idea of moving kids into what is known as least restrictive environments is to avoid the stigmatizing. I mean, right, in Jamaica, nobody wants to say my picnic is stupid or my picnic dumb or whatever. So I think just to add to the points that have been made, that's one of the reasons, one of the driving reasons behind inclusion, making sure that we don't have exclusive spaces where kids are psychologically affected in negative ways by the kind of services that they receive that can help them succeed in the same ways that students in general education or mainstream classrooms can. And I mean, I would love to know, I noticed that the Ministry of Education in Jamaica has a page on special education services, but it doesn't give much information as to how expansive in Jamaica we are at that kind of service. It would be nice to know what that looks like in the Jamaican context. How far ahead are we? Do we have a law like we have here in the States, the IDEA law that protects and that offers these kinds of services? Are colleges and universities offering courses or degrees to cater to the needs of special education services? It would be interesting to find out what it's like on the ground in Jamaica. I'm nowhere out of time and we'll have to revisit this again, but that's something that I would love to know. I would love to know more about.
And for those of you in the audience, thank you, Dr. Britton. For those of you in the audience, our next conversation will be on Palm Sunday, believe it or not, which is going to be March 24 at 4:30. We'll be sending out another flyer to that effect, and we're going to try to have a roundtable conversation, and you can call in live or chat, put your questions live in the chat, and we will respond to them. And some of these very issues that are coming up today. So, Dr. Britton, would you just close off for us and say goodbye to everyone? Thank you to Antoinette and Brown, our technology technician. She's behind the scene and she's always so willing and capable to assist us with the technological aspect of these presentations. And I'm going to leave it up to Dr. Britton to give Ms. McCoy her vote of thanks, and to the audience as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. McCoy, for sharing a wealth of information, your knowledge, your experience with us. We certainly benefited greatly from listening to you, and you're obviously an expert in this department, and I'm sure you'll continue to be. You know, for those of us in the audience, we thank you for being here. Hopefully you heard something that, even if it doesn't exist, maybe you can become an advocate in the local context and say, this is what we need in order to properly and appropriately serve Jamaican students who are struggling in school as a result of some disability, some cognitive, neurological, or physical disability that they may have. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do in the local space, in the Jamaican education space, as far as special needs are concerned, in addition to all the other pressing issues that we have as a nation. And hopefully what Ms. McCoy shared with us has sparked some idea, some some impetus that can help improve our educational landscape in the country. And I'm glad that we had you. I'm glad that we've been exposed to this kind of information, and job well done. And we thank all of our guests for being here and to join us on March 24 for another episode in this series offered by the Jamaica Diaspora Taskforce Action Network. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Antoinette. Good night. Bye-bye.